You know what's crazy? When I tell people that there's definitely a slowdown in the release of games, that tends to make a few people angry, which is weird because I think there definitely is a slowdown. Like we've seen this in a lot of genres of games where a lot of games just aren't coming out anymore due to the C word. I'm not going to say that word here on YouTube. But people take that as because they're still enjoying games, that games are still coming out. When I can tell you there's a clear drought in game releases due to, again, the C word. Now, you can kind of see this if you go to websites like IGN. There's definitely a slowdown there where you're seeing that they're covering Netflix and TV shows and movies and other nerd culture stuff because even they know there just hasn't been enough new gaming releases to base a whole website off of. Just go look at that channel. Now, to take this a step further, there are definitely genres of games that have seen just not many releases. And one of those releases, even past the C word, is top down action games, especially top down sci fi action games. Like when you try to think of games that have a top down view, they're shooters, they have a sci fi aesthetic. It's really hard to think of a lot of games like that. Like I remember Alien Swarm back in the day and a few other games in that style of game, but you don't really see these games a lot. And that's why I gotta be honest, I've been so excited for this game called The Ascent. Now, The Ascent is made by a much smaller studio, and in general, it's a single player or a co-op top-down twin stick shooter mixed with an RPG. There are tons of things going on here, especially with like the combat and other things. But just off the bat, you need to know that this is a twin stick shooter first and maybe like an RPG kind of heading up as far as like the gameplay mechanics, the upgrades, the armors, the guns, that type of stuff. But overall, the reason I'm excited about this game is because we haven't gotten anything like this in a long time, buddy. Like they just don't make games like this. Like I remember even back in the day playing games like Command and Conquer, the really old ones, or StarCraft, where you had those small single player missions that were top down and it kind of had a certain vibe of just like going through tunnels, doing missions and that type of thing. And we just don't get that. A lot of stuff is third person shooters, first person shooters, that type of stuff. We don't get these types of games anymore. And that's why this game has a lot going for it. Now, the reason that I definitely think this game, outside of the fact that we haven't been getting this, that this game might be worth your time is mainly a couple things. First of all, the graphics. And let me tell you, this is doing no justice to the way this looks. I fired this up in 1080p on a decent 1080 Ti. I have the barest of about a 4-year-old PC. My eyes melted. It's been a while since I've seen a game where the graphics are this crisp. Like the graphics are actually beautiful. There are points where you load into a map or you load into an open area where the camera pulls back and the color and just like the detail for this not to be chugging on my PC, it's absolutely insane. The people who made this game are pretty well experienced as far as I know. So you can pretty much tell that this is not an amateur game. Even though it's made by a few people, this is not an amateur game. This is not a throwaway game that you just kind of pick up and you go, oh, it doesn't look all that good or it doesn't play that well. No, it plays well. It looks amazing. And I'm going to be honest with you. Whoever made this game, the artists, are just showing off at some point. It's like there are certain points where, again, you load into an area, the camera spins around, it focuses on something, it pulls away, it shows a city, an elevator, some big explosion goes off, and you can tell somewhere the artists are like, look, buddy, I've been working on this game for a few years. This is a top-down game. No one's seen my explosion, so camera guy, I need you to spin the camera around and show them what I've been working on and the reason why I haven't played with my kids for 6 months. That's totally what happened. But just saying that the game is beautiful and the artists know that it's beautiful because the camera's spinning around like crazy, even in a top-down isometric game. So off the bat, this is a beautiful game. These old eyes are enjoying it. You should know that going into it. Now there are points where the camera zooms in and like it's during like the story parts of it, which are kind of its weaker elements. And when you do zoom the camera in, you can tell that the game's not designed to be viewed that close up, mostly with the character models. Now, the map, the background, the backdrops, the textures, walls, particles, all that up close still looks totally fine, right? But it's the character models. Even back when you are creating your character and the camera's really close, you can kind of tell, like you can really tell the game's not meant to be viewed that close up. Like it's respectable, that you can view it that close up. Like anyone ever take a picture and you're like, bro, delete that? You know what I'm saying? You could tell it's like a selfie that maybe that character wants to delete. But again, once the camera backs up, the game is beautiful. It's just that the characters are meant to be viewed really, really small. Now, that brings me to the story, and we're going to get to gameplay in a second because that's super important. Now that I'm talking about zooming in, I got to be honest with you, even though I love the aesthetic of this, like this is some futuristic, dystopian, cyberpunk dense thing. Now I say cyberpunk because I don't know menu wise or even aesthetic wise if they were inspired by cyberpunk coming out, which I feel bad for them now because cyberpunk is not even that good, and you can kind of see the inspirations here. There's definitely a cyberpunk inspiration with its aesthetic. I can almost tell that. But when it comes to story and mission, I got to be honest with you, even though it's got like crazy inspiration and it's dystopian and all that, and like you can, this is a world you can live in. Like there are even parts where you can walk around the world and the NPCs like react to you, and they're different sizes, and it's aliens and all this different stuff. That's super cool. But once it comes to the actual story, I can tell you, I'm like a little bit in and not all that impressive. But and even at points, like even I'm starting to skip story. That's not something I do. I'm just hitting skip, skip, skip. But that does not deter you from the fact that the gameplay in this game is freaking amazing. And that's what we got to talk about. The gameplay is on a level that I think a lot of games have gotten away with things where they weren't as polished, they weren't as mechanical, they didn't have a certain flow to them. This gameplay has a flow to it that's really good. Now, let me explain. This is a top-down twin-stick shooter, so they could totally went the super simple route of just being able to point at things, click them, and shoot them, right? But it's way more complex than that. Like, first of all, if an enemy is running at you, you've got to aim at them, you've got to shoot, you can roll and create distance, right? So all the basic like twin stick shooter things you would expect from a top-down game like this. But it goes deeper because if you hold your alt fire or your right click, I don't know what it is on console, I'm only playing on PC. What you do is you actually aim higher, which will not only stagger the enemy, but you can shoot over cover. And that is what gives the game its almost insane gameplay depth. Like for instance, let's say a bunch of enemies are running at you, right? And you want to get to cover. So first of all, you got to run to cover and you got to crouch behind that cover. So now any enemy that's shooting at you, those bullets can no longer hit you. Now, not only can you shoot the enemies on your left and the right that are flanking you, because these enemies will flank you. These are not stupid enemies that you will see in a lot of like looter games and that type of thing. Like these are AI that will flush you out. They'll grenade you. They'll run at you. They'll flank you. Melee enemies will run at you. Snipers will stand back. Like they will work together. If they don't feel like they can win a fight, they'll back off. I even saw that. Shocked the heck out of me. I thought it was Skynet time. I thought it was Terminator 2 moment. But the other thing about the gameplay and the mechanics is you can use the alt fire to shoot over cover, and that kind of mix of rock paper scissors, of being in cover, being out of cover, having enemies flush you out, there's a certain flow to it that's actually pretty good. And I think the gameplay is what I think really shines with this. Like you still have grenades, you have abilities. I haven't unlocked all of this stuff, so I can't really speak on it. This is not a review, just give you my initial impression is that there are tons of stuff, RPG stuff. Me personally, I don't really get into that unless it's like a live service game where I'm going to be playing more with my friends. I'm going to be playing over hundreds of hours. I think honestly, I'm probably going to play this for about the 15 hours that you would expect the campaign to be, or what they're saying it is about 15 hours. I'll maybe add 4 or 5 more hours on top of that if I can get friends playing with me. I'm looking to play this game no more than about 20 to 30 hours without any type of end game or anything. I don't know anything about that. But for what you're getting, especially in this game drought, this leans to be worth it for me. Like this seems like something that kind of came out of nowhere. And it's something of a high quality that is actually pretty fun to play. Again, the gameplay is what sticks out to me. I haven't really gotten into the RPG elements. Like there are parts of the RPG elements where the menus aren't really that great as far as telling you what things are. Some of the stat boosts and the icons aren't clear. Like, okay, is that electric damage? Is that shock damage? Is that stasis? Like, it's really hard to tell what things are because it's not very descriptive. Once you start playing, you start figuring out what that stuff is. Some of the credits and buying things inside of the NPCs isn't all that clear. So for now, I would say with the RPG elements, the more you play, the more you kind of gonna get into this. But off the bat, you're gonna be like, I don't know what this is. The icons are weird, like it's gonna be hard to get into. So I don't think right now the RPG elements are its strong points, but definitely the gameplay and the graphics are worth it alone. And even if you were to take all the RPG elements out of this and just made this a looter game where you're just picking up better loot and better loot and better loot and better guns. Oh, that's a nice gun over here. Let me grab that. This does more damage. Even if you only did that and you took out the other elements, I still think this game might be worth it. Now, another cool thing about this game is what super scared me is in the beginning, you're walking around this big, huge town and you're going to NPCs. And I started to get MMO-itis a little bit, and it scared me because I'm like, look, why are you having me walk through this big, huge thing where the artists are flashing the cameras around and you're trying to impress me with this big, like, world? And I'm like, bro, listen, they're not going to use this, because that's what happens in most games. Like, you go out, you do a little bit of action, and then they bring you back in town, and you spend like 2 hours in town walking around talking to NPCs as it's all pretty, and none of it ever matters because you barely come back to town unless you're turning a quest in. Sorry, this ain't it. Like, the town is actually playable space in a sense, where areas where there are typical NPCs, non-combat NPCs, those areas can be combat zones. And the cool thing about that is there are certain NPCs that won't attack you unless you get too close or unless you shoot at them. So the areas that would typically be like town NPC areas that would be completely irrelevant are used as combat zones, and it's kind of cool. So far, what I've seen so far in this game is pretty good. Again, I'm not tons and tons of hours in, so this isn't a review. I just wanted to kind of tell you guys that games are kind of coming back. Like, I was a little worried. We were in the dark place. We were in the nether realm for a second there with games not coming out. And this kind of turns it around just a little bit. So if you want to check this out, I can tell you from the first few hours of gameplay that it's been worth it for me. And it might be worth a check out for you. All right. Talk to you guys later.